Well, we've had quite a number of things happen here since 2 weeks ago. 2 earthquakes and all kinds of minor things, and a heat wave. But we're not doing as badly as the Babylonians did at the time of the writing of the book of Daniel. One thing about the Old Testament books that I think most people have not considered: the books are attributed to deity, but no proof of the actual presence of deity has ever been formally delivered. We talk about God's will, and it's very commonly referred to in the Scriptures, but just under what circumstance this will expressed itself is usually very dim. I think the answer is that these old books are, for the most part, a record and an interpretation of experiences. Most of the Old Testament books and the scriptures of other peoples are the records of repeating experiences. If in the course of history, in 50 situations, the conclusion is always determined by the integrity of the circumstance, then it is attributed to deity. In other words, there is proof of cause and effect. There is proof of moral value and factor in the happenings of mankind. These evidences have been gradually compiled. For instance, the story that we have of Jonah and the whale occurs in several different systems. In fact, in the Job, of course, in the Jonah, it is referred to as a great fish. Jesus is the first one to call it a whale. But the whale story occurs in Babylon, it occurs in the Far East, it occurs all over, always in the remote past. These stories seem to be, therefore, a series of fables like Aesop's fables, each one with a distinct moral meaning, a meaning that has continued and been re-emphasized over periods of thousands of years. It is not that a single incident is determined. It is that the testimony of the ages supports certain results as the results of certain causes. And as these results of good causes are nearly always benevolent, and the bad causes nearly always end in tragedy, this is attributed finally as solid evidence of the existence of God. If these different incidents were haphazard, no pattern, no value obvious, it might not have followed this pattern, or not led to a religious conclusion. But where certain things always result in the same conclusions, it seems reasonable to assume that those conclusions are the will of something stronger than the human being. Nature more powerful than man, God more powerful than nature. But always in behind all of these incidents, an integrity, a value for value pattern. And the ancients lived building on this concept for hundreds and thousands of years, put together these fables to express the evidence of the presence of a divine power judging all things. Now, the materialist might say that this is not demonstrable, that it's not true, that it's all haphazard, that it's all fancy. But then we look back on Caesar, dead at the foot of Pompey's statue, Alexander dead at the foot of the walls of Babylon, Napoleon in St. Helena, Hitler in the bunker in Berlin, Mussolini hanging on a lamppost in Italy. These things all seem to add up to the fact that these men did not live according to an integrity that it was acceptable to nature. Now, if some of one or two of them had been gloriously successful, we might question it. But where the same causes and the same circumstances invariably result in the same consequences, we begin to suspect that there is a law involved. And in the Old Testament, this law, dressed in fable, gives us the wonderful stories of the Old Testament. They are all cosmic legends, or legends that have been handed down for thousands of years, in new dresses, new applications, new interpretations, but always the same essential integrities and moralities. It comes out of this that most ancient people decided that the Lord God, or whoever we may be, like to have us behave ourselves. When we do not behave ourselves, we become like small children, requiring chastisement of some kind. And always we get it. Now, we have the same problem here today in the world. We have the world that has prided itself upon its accomplishments, that has apparently risen above all natural laws, that is now sinking into a morass of corrupted natural laws. We have done it all wrong, and we're not going to win this way. And when we go down to the defeat that is inevitable, 5,000 years from now, we will see evidences of the righteous judgment of deity. No one has seen deity, no one is likely to see him, but his works are obvious. And there is no other explanation that man can never defy the laws of nature without suffering. Now, natural laws are a little different from divine laws in this factor. The natural laws are concerned primarily with forms, with bodies, with the circumstances of environment and things of this nature. Plants and flowers and animals and creatures of all kinds live according to their own natures. They have no individuality such as we have. They live together, they die together. The whole groups of them perish together in great cosmic disasters. But with the individual, a certain higher law takes over. There is not only the physical laws of nature, but the moral laws of ethics. And these are very, very important. The Ten Commandments are a good example of this. It's presumably given to Moses on Mount Sinai by the very hand of God. Actually, those Ten Commandments are as old as time. The most primitive people believed them and held them to be true, because wherever they were violated, trouble resulted. Trouble that could not be explained away. The only way it could be explained was disobedience. But disobedience to what? Disobedience to some kind of an ethical code that is very difficult to capture in words, but which reaffirms and reasserts itself wherever conduct of any kind exists. So out of the mixtures of these fables and legends, there comes a sort of intellectual picture of what the divine will might be like, and what the type of a God there is. Now, if we wish to say that there is no God, then we must attribute all this to the operations of nature. But nature, on the other hand, is not adequate to explain many of these things. Man's conduct is often in violation of nature. Sometimes it is punished while keeping the law of nature, apparently, because it is a different code for the human being. But the fact remains that wherever we find a code set up in ancient times, like the Justinian Code or the Code of Hammurabi, we always find the same essential rules, with the statement that they were divinely bestowed upon mankind. This divine bestowal was apparently a series of repetitions of effects for similar causes. That no matter how many times we made the same mistake, we had the same punishment for it. There's no matter of how we got along doing well. Time after time, we maybe sacrifice a great deal, but we try very hard. And somewhere in the pattern, there seems to be a reward for that. We are rewarded for what we do right, and we are given a sharp blow on the rear end when we do wrong. And out of this comes integrity, the final footing of things upon the basis of the realities of life. Now, in the case of these certain fables that we can think of that are repetitious, take, for example, the legend of Samson. This legend is found in at least 5 different religions and over a period of thousands of years. The stories are almost always identical. A version of all of the Samson stories are found in various evidences such as Hercules and other great heroes who made the same mistakes, did the same things, received the same punishments, and were finally raised to some kind of higher recognition. The Odyssey of Homer appears again and again in the literature of the world. But it is not the incident that is important, or the story. It is the unfoldment of a pattern of laws, that things are according to the realities of a life bigger than ours. We live in a universe which we talk about conquering, but which inevitably conquers us. We break rules of nature and we suffer accordingly. We break rules of ethics and we destroy ourselves. We destroy ourselves through extreme competition. We destroy ourselves through ulterior motives, from lack of self-control, lack of self-discipline, lack of integrity, lack of faith, lack of love, lack of hope. These things, when they are permitted to endure, get us into trouble, and it becomes evidence that nature and nature's God wants us to keep these rules and do these things according to the highest moral ethics that we know. Morality and ethics then more or less arise from experience. They arise from doing the same thing. The burglar robs many houses and is not caught, but finally he is. The individual who commits a crime of importance may escape the judgment of jury, but in some way the tragedy comes back to him. We are paid for what we do in the coin of recompense. If we do well, we get a good record. If we do badly, we get a poor record. One of the most important examples of this was the case of Croesus, who in ancient times was the richest man who ever lived. Of course, he'd be more or less in the middle class only today, but in those times he was the top man in all matters of money. He led a philosopher once into his great treasuries, which were overwhelming and overflowing with gold and jewels and precious things. And this tremendous amassment was the greatest in all the world. And he showed it proudly, all the wealth, all the power, all the things he had treasured and gathered, all the successes that were piled into that great treasury. And the philosopher looked at it for a moment, and then he turned to Croesus and he said, "Yes, and a man with better iron will take it all away from you." And this is happening right now. We have all these various attitudes of success, but weaponry can take away almost anything that the individual can accumulate, himself included. So all the way back in those times, it became obvious to people that when you do things consistently wrong, where you do not keep the rules of life, life punishes. Not because it is despotic, but because, like a good parent, it is determined to prove that only right can survive. And until right survives, everything that evades it or avoids it fades away and is not seen again. And so we come now to the little story about the feast of Belshazzar, who was king of all Chaldea. And in this day's story, a prophet by the name of Daniel, as found in the book of Daniel, reads the handwriting on the wall of the banquet hall of Belshazzar. All the various wise people of Chaldea tried to read or interpret these letters, which appeared as though in blood upon the wall of the great banquet hall, where Belshazzar and his cohorts were celebrating a victory over their enemies. And finally, no one being able to interpret it, they sent for Daniel. And Daniel looked at the inscription on the wall and gave it, according to various editions of the scriptures, about a dozen variant interpretations. But the main one, the one that has come down to us as the most important, as the one which says, "You are found lacking. You are weighed in the balance, and the balance doesn't balance. So that in reality and substance, you are weighed in the balance and found wanting." No, I couldn't use that title, but I kind of tucked a couple of words on the end of it that I'm afraid cannot be attributed to pure Belshazzar. It is, I added after it, you were weighed in the balance and found wanting too much. Every one of us today is suffering from the fact that if we are weighed in the balance, there are certain factors that would require immediate correction. We would be forced to change a number of our ways and our thoughts. And we would find that we can support this by a careful study of the scriptures of every important religion of the world. And 1,000 years from now, our experience will be part of a scripture written at a later date. We are going to have exactly the same interpretation, and we are going to have our problem attributed to deity. We are going to be weighed in the balance, and we are going to be found unbalanced, untrue, unfair, unfaithful. And for that we will be punished. Now, the ancients looking at this situation and comparing it to 50 others that had gone before over a period of 5,000 years, all coming out exactly the same, would assume that it is not well for the individual to practice those faults by which such conditions are produced. If we are to be weighed in the balance and found wanting, then we must definitely realize that we are talking about some form of integrities or values. We know that because, like Belshazzar, we're in the midst of a war. We are being conquered and conquering. We are trying desperately to maintain a system of beauty and truth by means of violence. This is against practically every religion and shows up time and time again in the fables that are written about the conduct of mankind. We are therefore constantly in the presence of evidence. And when someone says, what proof is there that you can't do as you please? The proof is there. The proof is in the fact that individuals who do as they please have two choices. If they choose to do what is right, they are successful. And if they choose to do what is wrong, failure is as inevitable as it was 2,000 years ago. The time factor does not overcome the qualities of ethics. There only can be one surviving world pattern, and that is a pattern in which integrity is the foundation upon which all else is built. The only nation that is going to survive is a nation that is honest. The only leader that will ultimately lead anywhere and accomplish any good is the leader who is honest. And the only citizen who will have a safe domicile in the world here or to come will be the citizen who is honest. All these subterfuges, all this crime, all this evasion is simply a kind of madness. And nearly all powerful rulers have suffered from this type of insanity. The type of believing in the infallibility of their own will over the inevitables of life. Each individual who comes to a certain point of egotism decides that he is greater than the laws that govern man. He tries to break these laws, and as sure as circumstance, the laws break him. So we have now a problem that is coming into focus, that we are all being weighed in the balance again. And we are beginning to realize, as not for a long time have we been thinking, that we are really being tested for something. We are being checked to find out what we really believe. We are going to be divided, the wheat from the chaff. We are going to be found guilty of wrong or blessed for the rewards of right. And these decisions have to come. And there is no way of avoiding them. So we look at what there is. Now, also, we know from the story of the Old Testament and many other books, man was not merely a plaything of the Lord. Man was made to reflect and reveal the glory of reality. The actual work of man was to prepare him for universal citizenship, to prepare him for an eternal existence in a beautiful and eternal world. Up to this time, this has not happened. But it's also true that up to this time, there is no world ever come that deserved it. Many things start beautifully and nobly, but of course along the way, temptation comes in, opportunity for profit comes in, the desire for personal recognition comes in. All these things, little by little, the ethics disappears. It disappears with corruption, and there can be no corruption in nature that is not subject to punishment. And the stories of the cities of the plains and Sodom and Gomorrah are not fables. They have occurred many, many, many times, some within the lifetime of the present generation. Always, however, back of it is the immutable fact that good must prevail, and that which is not good must disappear. And it cannot be thrown away, and it cannot be taken away by prayer. If we believe that we can be reformed by asking for reformation, we find that it hasn't happened. The only time that we can be reformed is when we, of our own will and intention, correct the faults that we suffer from, and present ourselves in our best light to the law which judges all things. This problem, then, we are facing in the present international situation. We have discovered more than man ever knew before and abused it more completely. We have advanced further in science than ever before and have fallen back deeper in ethics than any civilization of importance. Others have fallen as the result of doing the thing we are doing, but we somehow hope vainly that we will succeed where truth tells us we have to fail. Now, having come to some kind of a reasonable realization of this, we can pass from the great picture, which we all see every day on television, read it in the newspaper, see it set forth in the journal, and hear it shouted from the pulpits of 10,000 churches, that we have got to do something to change the basic pattern of society. Now, we find that society functions well only when the leader is just and the follower is honest. Until this combination exists, there is no permanence in anything. There is no way of preventing a people from becoming disobedient if leadership is disloyal or unworthy of leadership. It is therefore necessary for us to start somewhere to find out what we have to do. And we can get a great deal of information on this subject from the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount. These two documents we regard as theological. We may like to think that they're just something that somebody said but didn't really mean, or it was something that somebody said but nobody can live up to it. This is not true. There's nothing in the Ten Commandments or the Sermon on the Mount that is impossible. But there is much in both of them that is impossible if the individual himself wishes to remain impossible. If we prefer to take a chance and use the cocaine and die from an overdose 2 or 3 years later, we have the right to do this. No one can stop us, but the punishment comes directly upon ourselves. Everyone who abuses any fact of life will suffer from the abuse which he has committed. There is no escaping this, no way of escaping it. And so, because of its inevitability and immutability, it has been attributed to deity. It is attributed to the only power or force or energy that we can recognize, which when it operates gives righteous judgment, bestows upon that which it works with the blessing of integrity, and punishes that which departs from the laws of life. These realizations come back to all of us. Now, in this particular generation, there are a great many people who are beginning to wake up to these things. In the last 5 or 10 years, the interest in trying to find an answer, this interest has increased 1,000-fold. Hundreds of organizations have been created in an effort to try to find an answer that will stand up against the pressures of the time. Well, some of these organizations have done very well for people. and some others have done very well for themselves. This problem is one we all have to face. Wherever an improvement is demonstrated or dynamically disseminated in the hope of personal profit, there's something wrong in the picture. The idea that we're going to find the illusions, the truths behind them for $100 an evening is much, much wrong. No can do. Not possible. The first point about true ethics is to get out of the idea that the reformation of mankind is the greatest financial opportunity in the history of the world. There never was such a chance to get rich out of trying to make people behave themselves. Unfortunately, however, the emphasis is wrong to begin with, and the people do not behave themselves because the inspiration of integrity is missing. And therefore, in this time, it is very important for us to realize that we are combining not for profit, but for salvation. That we are coming together not because we can buy and sell cheaper from each other, or no, we are not going to build a new civilization to get over tariff laws. These kind of things we are not going to think of anymore. We are going to discover that we must unite for common good or perish. That we have been given every opportunity imaginable to improve our dispositions, and we, for the most part, stay the same. On the other hand, the Lord works in mysterious ways, truly, because go back to the Scripture again, and we have the history of the good people. We have those who kept the law, sometimes under great stress and privation and even death. Martyrdom in some instances was their only visible reward. But these good people are blessed in the life of the world in which we live. And because of this fact that this material world is not the whole story, those who have lived well, even if it has cost them their lives, are richer than those who have had everything in this world that they wanted and die impoverished in ethics. So we have to make some decisions in this particular problem. The decisions of how to handle the responsibilities of the moment. Reforms are necessary in every area, but wherever there is a reform, it interferes with somebody's profit. And it's the profit that's worrying us. The other type of profit is hard to find. We are actually working constantly under the shadow of ulterior motive. We feel that this tremendous sorrow and pain and worry of the world is a tremendous opportunity to forward other ulterior motives and become very wealthy over the sufferings, uncertainties, and fears of our neighbors. This is only going to make it worse. This is going to bring again another example of what happens to those who do not keep the rules. The older scriptures tell us that they were cast out, that they wandered in the desert, and had to go through great trials and tribulations before they were permitted to ask forgiveness and return to the rules of the game. This is the proper attitude we have now. What do we need primarily at the moment? We need what we have needed probably off and on for the last 6, 7, 8,000 years. Something that we've had small examples of are short periods in which integrities were fashionable. But these were not very common and didn't last very long. What we have got to do now is to begin to build in the values that we know to be right and build them into an idealistic system. A materialist is essentially an atheist. A materialist does not believe in a divine power, or he wouldn't act the way he does. Now, the fact that he does what he does, he feels he is a free agent, that he can do anything he pleases to do. And for a certain time and under certain conditions, he's correct. If he wants to waste a life, he can do it. If he wants to drink himself to death, he can do it. If he wants to go under narcotics, he can do it. And he will shorten his life or fill his life with sorrows and miseries and sickness and a premature death as a reward for his disobedience of common sense and nominal reasonable patterns. But there is a way in which we can gradually get over this primary materialism by really reading the Scriptures again, from which we learn that the earth and the fullness thereof belong to the Lord. This is something we've completely forgotten, as at the present time the earth belongs to whoever can get a mortgage on it. And everyone, Napoleon, Caesar, Hitler, Mussolini, all these have tried to get that mortgage. The earth is here and they are gone. Actually, we do not own this planet. We do not own anything, because all we have is a right of occupancy. And just as sure as we have this right of occupancy, we can loan it to somebody else, we can bestow it, but whatever we bestow again is only the right of occupancy. We have a world built upon great extravagances of land, of power, of wealth, of profit, all of these things contributing to the troubles we have. We cannot have a world that is devoted to immorality and at the same time have a beautiful moral universe. And we have to start where we can. We know that most of the important corrections would result in somebody else getting mad at us. We would be interfering with a glorious system of profit upon which our whole world way is built. We would take away from the great and powerful organizations their ability to control the financial resources of the planet. So to prevent this from happening, anything is preferable. Things must remain the same, or else the great pattern of economic wealth will be disturbed. Well, it has failed already. It is already failing again and more. And in a little time it is going to be such a complete failure that nobody can believe it anymore. But they will, for a little time, string desperately and try to perpetuate a system of profit which has no foundation in facts. Imagine now that our 6 billion fellow countrymen, or fellow world citizens, continue to multiply at the present rate, and we will find in a short time that we will use up every natural resource that we possess, that we will destroy practically every base resource of our planet. Every day more ponds and lakes and rivers are being polluted. Someday there just won't be any other. But these people work on the basis that when the time comes, we will find something to do with these things, so that we can keep on being just what we are. This is unrealistic, because unless there is a terrible catastrophe which destroys the greater part of the Earth's population, which it probably is not in hand, because the case is not clear enough, but we will have to face the importance of becoming moderate people. Now, I watch the newspapers pretty closely, and these people who are working so hard to get hold of everything they have do not seem to be very happy with it. These great patterns of wealth, these fabulous incomes, these enormous investments, these process of practically buying and selling nations doesn't seem to be doing anybody any good. We only end up with the worst debt that we haven't had in history, and we also make more enemies every day than the Medes and the Persians ever knew. So we are not getting anywhere with this at all. I think we should begin now to think firmly of rewriting history, rewriting it for the school child, rewriting for the grammar school, and a little enlarged copy for the high schools. And we also should make a nice deluxe binding on some of them for the parents to read, because we need to know exactly what is happening in our world. We don't need to know just how many dollars we made or whether we have a deficit this year or not. We want to know exactly what is happening to a world without conscience, without integrities, and without moral foundations. We want to know what happens when we ridicule the best things there are in life, glorify that which is corrupt, and become addicted to all kinds of crimes and degeneracies. This can result in another cataclysm, such as that which was written on the wall of Belshazzar's palace. We are being weighed now, and we will be. There's no need to go out and get tremendously upset. Its only problem is that we do need to go out and get upset to the degree that we are willing to begin to work on ourselves. Every family should have some kind of moral instruction. It should bestow this moral instruction upon its children. Every business should have a moral code by which that business is controlled and which will not be broken. Every profession should have a moral, ethical code for the practice of the members of that profession, which will not be exploited, will not be corrupted, and will not lead to the transformation of the motives of a profession. The motive of medicine is to help people who are sick. Today the motive is cash. The tremendous amount of money involved. Money can lead and does lead and is a form of moral compromise. It is something that should never enter into human relationships. It will remain, however, as long as nobody really minds. We talk about it, but when the time comes to act, we are too busy doing something else. I think there should be a legal code set up for all the major professions, fixing completely and entirely the method and means of administering that profession. What it can do, what it cannot do, what it can charge and what it cannot charge, and the penalties for overcharging. This is important. Actually, the laborer is worthy of his hire. The doctor is worthy of a fee that is appropriate to the service he renders, but he is not entitled to exploit the sick. All these things are part of the loss of the moral code. Now, the sacred books of the world, all of them, were moral codes. They were codes that were intended to help people to understand what is good and what is bad. Nearly all of these books contain a factor involving the fact that those who keep these rules are blessed in the sight of the universe. They are the ones who are keeping the laws, keeping the rules, and are deserving of further consideration. Now, in China in the old days, the doctors had a cute rule. The patient hired a family physician. This family physician had his appointment on one basis only. He was to keep the family well. He received his monthly salary as long as they were well. When they got sick, his pay stopped. The entire motive now was obviously to get them well again. Whereas with us today, the longer they're sick, the more fortunate the physician becomes. But these things have to be worked through in some practical way. So we need a world ethic, something that gives us the strength and character to begin a new world charter, a new world parliament of faith and knowledge. And the seat and center of it must be religious. Now, this religion doesn't mean that the individual has to believe in any particular appearance of deity, because nobody has seen any of them. But it means that there must be an acceptance of the fact of a divine moral principle is at the root of life, demonstrated by the fact that every trouble we have comes from disobeying moral principles. Therefore, whether we believe in deity or not, if we believe in health and survival, we have to keep the rule. There is no other way. So we go into other fields where there's all kinds of dissimilations to give us problems and sickness. We also need to have a complete reconstruction of the basic code for higher education. The France now, all education is based upon one basic idea: to take a field of specialized learning where there is probability of advancement and a very superior type of employment. We are out to get the best job there is. Well, this has been badly broken up, however, by some modern discoveries. And when these discoveries came along, there were no graduates to take the jobs. The discoveries were too recent. But they'll come, and we'll gradually have various experts. And by the time the expert gets the full training, his machine will be obsolete. This is the same way all the way along. You're not supposed to do this. Life is not supposed to be an addiction to a profession that will get riches and nothing else. There is no comfort, no beauty, no love or fineness in working machines. We may say yes, but they do help people. Certainly they help people, but not to the degree of making them the principal objective in life. The principal objective in life when we want to help people is to care for people, to love people, to serve people, to be kind to people, and to advance those common virtues by which the people as a whole advance in their understanding of life, in the care of their children, and in the preparation of their own futures. The final purpose of this civilization is that the human being shall improve, that he shall become sufficient to be wiser and more virtuous and a better human being and a better person. He is not here simply to leave a fortune to his descendants in his will. And very often he doesn't get that far. They break it up and take it away from him while he's still alive. And this, of course, is considered to be pretty good business. It may be good business, but it is bad life. And we're all doing good business by doing wrong. And this is not good. And we can't expect everyone to change their ways, but we can take a little more suitable stand in these things. Each individual is the master of a small world of his own, which is a miniature of the great world. And this miniature world of his own he calls his family. And it is surrounded by various friends, neighbors, and so forth, and is a little constellation in itself. This little world is within the control of various members of this family. There is a perfect possibility of this family becoming a better family. This is the very secret and idea behind the teachings of Mencius, the great Chinese philosopher. The Mencius believed that the archetype of universal peace is a family living in harmony. While relatives and friends and neighbors cannot get along together, we have no right to expect nations to become better. Because nations are not problem, is it true, but they are actually aggregates of individual disorders. And as long as the individual is disordered in his own living, there will be no solution merely by spreading this disorder over the world. There is no solution in treaties, in great pacts, because before the things are even signed, we begin to find the ulterior motives that dominated their preparation. Everything has something behind it that is not right. And as long as that happens, we're going to have more examples of Belshazzar's feast. What we're looking for now is something that has right behind it, rather than right on the surface, an ulterior motive underneath. And this is true in the affairs of nations, in every line of business. It is true in the quality of goods, and it is very true in entertainment. Gradually we see entertainment gradually deteriorating with only one consideration, profit. And because of the way in which the modern civilization is centered, profit centers around ignorance and stupidity. The less intelligence this art is, the greater its appeal. Nobody cares about these things. And no one has developed the judgments to judge them. There is no reason why a very short time, common sense could not make a major change in human attitudes. Until that time comes, we've got to do it ourselves. We've got to begin to straighten out the various ideas behind ourselves, and we also have to get a clearer view of what religion does for mankind. We've got to be very careful now when we learn that many religious groups are in bad trouble economically. They have gotten themselves into something that they should never have been in. They have forgotten that the Lord God does not live in a palace. We build great churches, as Ingersoll said, cathedrals for saints, dungeons for sinners. And the dungeons are in the foundations of the cathedrals. But what we need is the good churchgoer. What we need is to realize that then finally the most perfect church of all is the human heart. For it is here that the individual, at least sentimentally, comes into contact with the realities of himself. We need to recognize religion not as a new source of wealth, but as a new source of strength against the corruptions of wealth. We do not need more stained glass windows and no more mighty cathedrals. What we need is the simple place of worship. Our forefathers had this, a little wooden church with a pastor who made only a few dollars a month, with a small flock of devout people, who worked in the ground with their harvest and came to church on Sunday in the family wagon. This type of thing had something about it that was good. We can say it was stupid and old-fashioned and all that, but it was sincere. And the little church that is sincere has much to commend it, while the great church that is not sincere has nothing to recommend it whatsoever. So all the way along the line, we've got to gradually do that which will prevent us from being found wanting. And the reason why we will be found wanting is because we want too much. We want everything. We want to find new ways every day for taking money away from somebody else. We want some kind of a pretext to take another vast amount of money for some purpose that is of no permanent value. While all things are judged by money, a religion is going to be very in trouble. When they showed the Roman coin to Jesus and asked him what they should do in matter of taxes, Jesus replied, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, but unto God that which is his." And this is exactly our problem. There's a great deal of difference. We cannot render unto God the things that belong to Caesar. And we cannot pay for our sins by the coinage that belongs to Caesar. We can keep out of jail maybe by paying our fines with that money, but we do not increase in stature or in dignity or in magnitude of insights. So we have to recognize that there is religion desperately needed today and desperately divided. Here we have a religious world which includes, according to a very late statement that I saw, approximately 3.75 billion human beings. The other part of the population isn't made up of atheists, but very largely of primitive peoples about which we have very little knowledge. But the majority of human beings believe in good. And because 3/4 of the earth's population believes in something good, why do we have 3/4 of the earth's population either in arms or in the armament industry? Why do we have these things? Why is it that somewhere along the line we've lost kindness, lost friendship, lost love for each other, and have all kinds of strange ulterior motives that pass for integrities but have no foundation in them? So when we are weighed in the balance, and the people are beginning to see some funny writing on the wall, and they're not quite sure what it is, but there's always a possibility that a new message is being put there. There are words and teachings and ideas about the future. Some are very beautiful, some are fearful, and very few are really essentially materialistic today. Even our most hardened materialists are beginning to look for an excuse to become idealists. And they can find it if they want it. But the point is that we are all beginning to worry seriously about the depletion of our resources, about the population of explosions, about the diseases and natural disasters which correspond neatly to the plagues of Egypt. And we find that all these things have been repeated time and time again. The sands of the desert have buried more civilizations than we'll ever know. And unless we want to be part of that which is wiped out by our own cupidity and stupidity, we're going to have to change our ways. We're going to have to begin to live the things we claim to believe. We're all trying to do something about it. We all are reading better books. We're all talking about these things. Most people who are interested in our activities here have been trying to live these points and principles, and are trying still to be better people. And this is the solution. Only by becoming better people can we have a better world. Only by curing these selfish instincts which have dominated us for ages can we really have the kind of life that we all need. Belshazzar was quite king in his day, and he loved to exploit and enslave people. He became a potential ruler of the world. He had joined in with a number of others like Genghis Khan and some of the early Caesars and the Greek conquerors that went out to conquer the whole world. He was, and the Roman Empire was the first great socialistic democracy or oligarchy or whatever you want to call it. Rome became mistress of the world. Her colonies were everywhere. She owned half the globe, and what she didn't own, she was working on. But in the sum of it all, Rome died and miserably ended because of the decay of the government. Little by little, all these imprisoned peoples began to break away, and Rome no longer had the physical strength to hold them. Now, if this holding had not been a physical policing, Rome might have lived another 2,000 or 3,000 years, but she could not police the territories she had conquered. She should never have conquered in a way that required policing. It was not that these colonies should be controlled by force or by military means. They should have been controlled by friendship, because these people should be grateful for what Rome had done for them and not panicky over what Rome was doing to them. There was no reason why a conquering power should be destroyed if that conquest is carried on in a spirit of sharing good. If the conquest was bringing teachers and idealists and inventors and artists and musicians into common understanding, if crops and produce of all kinds was bettered, these things would be excused and the people would live together in happiness. But where conquest is simply putting a despot over another country, or putting half a dozen of your despots in different countries, all this is part of rule and ruin, which is one of the problems we face so deeply. And of course, from the time of Belshazzar on down, the same problems have continued. And the Bible incident is perfectly justified in saying that there is some kind of a moral factor, a mystical factor involved. Now, according to the Bible, of course, this mystical factor is deity. That some way this is all due to the fact that deity weighs them in the balance and found them wanting. But the deity that found them wanting is still here. Now, if there was no deity that found them wanting, and they simply were outwitted by two other nations that became jealous of them, then we are still in the same picture. Because today we are in the midst of a world that's jealous of us. We are in a world that would take over most of each other's countries at the slightest provocation, if any. We are in a world in which, out of all the progress we have made, could sometime become the greatest holocaust of all time, nuclear war. Now, nothing stands between us and this disaster except ethics. And ethics is our way of expressing divine will. There is only the will of deity between us and that difficulty. Now, if we trust to the Lord, or if we trust to the laws of nature, if we trust to the universal plan as we have seen it from the beginning of time, we are comparatively safe. But if we break the tradition that has been established by the ages, if we break the rules, then come to the same end with all other rule breakers, it's our own fault. We are too big now, too grown up now, to play warfare in sandboxes. We are no longer children throwing mud pies at each other. We are powerful individuals who have no real understanding of the basic unity of life. They were in the same type of situation that we found, for instance, in Japan at one time. When Japan was first opened to the West, we sent a consul general over there to act as an ambassador. The first thing that he wanted when he got there was beefsteaks. And at that time, most of Japan was vegetarian. In fact, the government was subsidizing vegetarianism. So everyone who had an animal of any kind drove it into the forest and hid it. And they had an awful time until they finally caught an old steer and finally got the steaks for the American ambassador. And now on the site where this thing occurred is a beautiful monument topped by a statue of the bull who died to give the American ambassador his favorite meat. Now that's a sort of a ridiculous situation, but it shows the tendency that we have. What we want, we want. What we've had, we're going to have. And this going on and on and on, in spite of the daily warnings of our troubles. So if anybody has a real idea of doing something worthwhile, it might be good for them to sit down quietly and make a chart or a plan of their own lives. Why are they alive? What are they doing? What is going to happen to what they have? Who is going to use it better than they have? Why are we going to leave this to that and that to this? What is behind all this? We have a few more years of life. What are we going to do with them? Are we going to keep right on wasting them? Are we going to live so that the doctor's bills will eat up most of our estate? Are we going to get tangled into troubles with other people until the lawyers will eat up the rest of the estate? Are we going to live this way, or are we going to gradually begin to put the world in order? Put it into a pattern of realities, put it into a pattern of facts and values with which we can live. The idea that we want too much seems to be universal. And money becomes the only answer to that. Well, it's all right if people want what they can get, I guess, but they shouldn't want what is unreasonable. They get nothing out of it. I have read recently several accounts of some of our very wealthy theatrical people. When I mean wealthy, I mean that who have fortunes up into the hundreds of millions. Not one of these people is happy. Not one of them has many real friends. Not one of them knows what to do with the money. And most of it will probably ultimately be doled out as alimonies. Nobody seems to know what they're going to do with this great wealth. They can only sleep in one bed. They can only live in one house. So they get a summer house, a yacht, and a winter house, and loan it to their friends because they never go there. Or they go up to Las Vegas and are relieved of some of their spare cash. These are the things that people struggle and die for, to get that bank account. And they don't know what to do with it after they get it. It doesn't do them anything in the term of happiness. They're just as miserable as the poor, in fact more miserable. And many of them are sitting up all night with their lawyers trying to figure out how to balance their taxes. And so this is the desirable thing. This is the thing that lifts people above all competition in life. The simple life is still the best. The simple life of the individual who has what he needs, a reasonable amount of luxury, but not enough wealth to destroy the next 3 generations of his own family. If he has too much money, his children will suffer. And if that goes on, their children will suffer. And wealth is the root of indolence and waste. And this planet is too much now depleted by waste to continue indefinitely in this way. So religion, it seems to me, should include not only a love of God and a love of our fellow man, but a determination to protect our world from corruption as far as we can do so, to prevent waste, to prevent the misuse of natural resources, and to put the conservation of resources and energies as a primary part of our faith, not as something that has to be worked out by our politicians in Washington or in some state capital. Religion should mean that a world in which we are enriching values. A really religious people will always be a people protecting the sacred things of life, protecting love and friendship and faith and kindness and compassion. These are the things that enrich life. The other things, material and otherwise, really in the end impoverish life. We need to have the closeness that comes from a simple sympathy for each other, a kind of relationship by which we will not in any way that we can prevent injure any other person, so that we can begin to live with some of these things. And by living this way, we will fulfill part of this Bible story that we are so much concerned with. The siege of Troy is a story of a twofold world locked in conquest over a vanity. The great wars of the ancients were fought for power and glory and wealth. The great wars of the Middle Ages were fought for physical power or clerical power. The great crusades were the same thing we see coming back today in the problem of Islam and Christianity. Back in the Crusades, the Christians lost the war. They could not regain Jerusalem, which remained in the hands of the infidel. But when it was all over and the crusade ceased, the infidel voluntarily opened the roads of pilgrimage so that the followers of Christians could visit their holy city in perfect safety whenever they wanted to. But they weren't going to have it taken away from them by force. Suleiman the Magnificent had as a master, it is said, Rabbi Maimonides, one of the greatest of the Jewish scholars. So little by little, we are going to have to take care of this. We have two militant creeds now. And Muslimism and Christianity are dangerous loggerheads. The other faiths are more or less quiet, but they're still very, very strong. Small groups like the Sikhs are beginning to give great trouble. Everywhere, the problem of religion is taking on a militant atmosphere. And this we do not want. This should be stopped immediately. But it will never stop as long as we call anyone who disagrees with us in theology a heathen. This is something that we have no right to do, because we have no right to believe that the individual with the right heart and the right mind cannot just see as far into the truth of things as the members of our own denominations. It is all a matter of beginning to realize that if we don't live together, we're going to leave a barren world, perhaps to the animals or the insects. We don't know. But we cannot keep it going this way. And religions still aren't on speaking terms with each other. Each one has its own infallibility. And we have 100 new sects that have arisen in the last 10 years, each of which is the only one that is perfect. So all these things gather again. The same things, taking on new clothes with the same ideas in every case, going on and on and on. This we've got to get out of our systems. If we can't change other people, at least we can begin to temper our own attitudes on these things. And if even a small fragment of society really changes its way of life, that change can be developed into a world movement. The very tools that we want to get rid of can be used to help us to get rid of them, because we can prove conclusively to anyone that a good piece of merchandise at a proper price is better for all concerned than a poor piece at a high price. We have accepted the high price because it's part of a great competitive era. But gradually we are waking up to the fact that competition is nothing but generalized selfishness. It is not a virtue, and the proceeds of it have no blessing before man or deity. So all these things come up and they work, but it's nice to realize how the Bible has anticipated them and then given this power that makes things work into a pattern, makes this power God. The God that wrote in living fire the tablets of the law on the crest of Sinai. This deity was not visible to Moses, but Moses is supposed to have been a lawgiver, and he seems to have been wise in the wisdom of the Egyptians and other strange people of the past. Whatever it is, he touched the Phoenician and the Chaldean and the Babylonian and the Assyrian foundations of knowledge. And then someone said, well, what was this handwriting on the wall? And nobody could read it. Well, there was a man by the name of Garrett, who was the astronomer, Gaffarel, who was the astronomer of Cardinal Richelieu. And he wrote a little book called Unheard of Curiosities. And he had an answer for that question, which might not be the only one, it might not be the real one, but it is certainly an interesting one. He says that the whole concept was based on the Hebrew alphabet. In other words, the constellations are the consonants, constellations in the heavens, are the consonants or Hebrew consonant letters. The planets are the vowels, which move constantly through the patterns of the constellations. And in every move they make, they spell out words, because in every word there must be a vowel. And in many cases in the Hebrew the vowels are not written. But in any event, the motion of these vowels through the star groups, with each of the consonants a letter, results in an endless pattern of words. And these words, if they can be understood or analyzed or explained, might tell us the whole story. For instance, if you have two constellations, that one is a B and one is a T, then the vowels move through it. If you put A moves through it, it becomes bat. If a wager thought comes through it, it becomes a bet. And so on, all of the forms of the letters. And if something else is very small, it becomes a bit. All of these letters moving through the constellations create an immense sequence of word forms. And if we could read those word forms with the constellations and the planets in them, we might have the secret of a celestial language that has been in use since the beginning of time. It might be in some respect similar to our astrological speculations, but it is not prophetic necessarily. It simply tells, if we know how to read it, that there is a constant communication of energies between the invisible world of causes and the visible world of effects. It's a very stimulating and interesting idea, and I think sometime someone will do something with it. We have Gaffarel's book, by the way, if anyone is interested. It's in our library collection. But in all cases, we're looking for an answer. We're looking for some way to solve this problem. We see the handwriting coming in 1,000 different ways, particularly in red letters in our own hearts. We know something is wrong. We know that the world that we're bringing our children into is not the world that we want them to be in. And we know that they do not know a better world because we've never been able to convince them of it. But if we could prove, for instance, to members of any major faith that their own stories, the fables and legends and myths of religion, are all of them explanations of universal laws in their various aspects, and that these stories, therefore, all tell of what God is doing to certain things under certain circumstances and conditions. And with that realization to work from, it seems as though we ought to be able to solve some of these problems. Actually, the beginning of it all is not that we should dash off and try to join some religion. The thing is that we should grow up with our reading, writing, arithmetic, all cooperating to help us to become better people and not just simply smarter people. And there should be reading, writing, arithmetic, and ethics. There should be an idealism in every heart in the world, a dream of something better, a dream that can be fulfilled to some degree by anyone who wants to give the time and effort to it. But a life should be a span of years in which at least a part is dedicated to the service of the eternal plan upon which we all depend for existence, and without which the world itself falls into chaos. And now that so many people are becoming interested in these things, it is very important that we judge these people and these organizations thoughtfully, and always remembering that the real sincere group of people or individuals are the ones who give all and demand the least. That they want more of people to love each other, serve each other, protect each other. They are not in business, they are in idealism, philosophy, ethics, morality, and all the things that help to make a better world. And if we can find groups of this kind, which have within them a reasonable degree of integrity and a reasonable degree of dedication, we can help them all to do better work, and we can do better ourselves. Because when we work for something bigger than we are, that is the time when we have a right to feel a little bit bigger ourselves. But while we are not doing things to help, we are, without knowing or realizing, doing things to hinder. And this is no time for hindrance. This is a time for all individuals to renew their dedications to the principles of reality and integrity. It is only through a quiet, consistent service of each other that we can prove conclusively that religion is in our hearts and in our daily lives. And wherever anyone has a religious life that is dedicated, they may have troubles. Their religious life that is honorable is not particularly popular or too widespread. It is not appreciated because it interferes with corruption. And nearly every good person has had to fight corruption. But it is a great fight. It is a worthwhile fight. And the individual who wins is already on his way to a better state of existence. So we do all we can, but let's remember that these stories in the Scriptures about all the wonders that God does, Job and his comforters, and all the Samson and Delilah, and the Song of Solomon, and all of these stories, fables, and legends, are based upon centuries of experience with principles that are immutable. That while the story may be fashioned any time, maybe as late as tomorrow it will come, but the fact behind the story, the symbol, is the concealing part of a great moral truth. And the moral truth is that the final end of all things for the constructive value of mankind is that all human beings will unite in the love of the divine principle and in the service and affection for each other. This is what we have to have if we're going to solve the issues of the day. And I think now we'd better bring it to a close this morning.